The unified collective had spent approximately 17,000 standard cycles perfecting the art of peaceful coexistence, which was impressive considering they'd spent the previous 30,000 cycles perfecting the art of nearly exterminating each other. Progress, as they say, is measured in the bodies you don't create. Station Kepler 7, named after some long-dead species mathematician, who'd probably never imagined his legacy would involve floating in the void, serving overpriced nutrition paste, represented the pinnacle of this achievement. It wasn't just an educational facility. It was a monument to the idea that sufficiently advanced technology could sand down the rough edges of biological reality until everyone played nicely together. The station spun in the darkness between stars, a wheel of gleaming metal and force fields that housed approximately 40,000 students from 217 species. Every corridor hummed with neural dampeners, atmospheric regulators, and enough surveillance equipment to make a paranoid AI feel vindicated. Violence here wasn't just discouraged. It was theoretically impossible. The dampeners would detect aggressive intent approximately 1.3 seconds before it translated to action, and simply shut down the relevant neural pathways. You'd want to throw a punch, your arm would politely decline to cooperate. And you'd spend the next 3 hours in counseling discussing your feelings. The collective had thought of everything. They'd engineered solutions to problems species hadn't even known they had. Territorial disputes? Resolved through carefully moderated debates. Mating competition? Redirected into academic achievement metrics. Predator-prey dynamics? Neutralized through species-specific dining facilities and carefully scheduled corridor usage. It was perfect. Sterile, perhaps. Arguably soulless. But perfect. For 16,998 cycles, Station Kepler 7 maintained a flawless record. Not a single physical altercation. Not one unauthorized aggressive display. The administrators liked to mention this during recruitment tours, usually while gesturing expansively at walls that cost more than some planetary economies. Then, in cycle 16,999, the collective made a decision that would later be described as ambitious, progressive, and catastrophically short-sighted, depending on which committee report you read. They admitted humans. To be fair, nobody had expected Earth to produce anything interesting. The survey teams had cataloged it as Deathworld Classification 11A, which in the collective's typically understated terminology meant every single thing on this planet is trying to kill every other thing, including the weather. The fact that a sapient species had emerged from this biological thunderdome was surprising. The fact that they'd achieved spaceflight without exterminating themselves was borderline miraculous. The fact that they wanted to join the collective's educational programs suggested either remarkable optimism or a fundamental misunderstanding of their own nature. The collective, in their infinite wisdom and finite foresight, chose to interpret it as the former. The human delegation had been refreshingly straightforward during the admission negotiations. Yes, their planet was essentially a horrifying nightmare where everything from the microscopic organisms to the planetary crust itself seemed personally offended by the concept of life. Yes, their evolutionary history read like a horror anthology. Yes, their idea of safe would make most collective species require sedation. But they were very interested in cultural exchange, and they promised their students would be on their best behavior. The collective, swayed by the humans' apparent earnestness and their own conviction that sufficiently advanced systems could civilize anyone, agreed. They did insist on a few modifications to standard protocol. The neural dampeners, for instance, didn't work on humans. Something about their neurological structure, which had evolved to process threat assessment at speeds necessary to avoid being eaten by their own planet, meant the dampeners just gave them headaches. This was fine, the collective decided. Surely a species that had developed philosophy, art, and diplomatic protocols could be trusted to simply not act on their violent impulses. This assumption would later be taught in xenopsychology courses as a cautionary tale. The human students arrived in small groups, carefully distributed across the collective's various institutions. Station Kepler 7 received 6. 5 of them adapted to academy life, with varying degrees of success, becoming minor celebrities for their ability to tolerate atmospheric pressure that would liquefy most species, and their baffling enthusiasm for what they called spicy food, which was actually low-grade chemical warfare. The 6th, however, was different. Her name doesn't matter for this story, not because it wasn't important, but because within 3 cycles of her arrival, most students had stopped using it. She became the human, the Deathworlder, or more commonly, the one we don't make eye contact with. This wasn't because she was aggressive or hostile. Quite the opposite. She attended every lecture, completed every assignment, and maintained what humans would consider a friendly demeanor. But there was something in her smile that translated poorly across species barriers. The Vreniks, whose compound eyes could detect electromagnetic fluctuations invisible to most species, said her smile made their sensory organs ache. The Othani, who communicated partially through bioelectric fields, claimed she disrupted their signals just by being nearby. The Quilics, a gaseous collective consciousness, reportedly needed to reconsolidate after sharing a classroom with her for an hour. Nobody could articulate exactly what was wrong, which made it worse. She wasn't breaking any rules. She wasn't technically doing anything threatening. She was just herself. And herself had been forged in a crucible where being unconvincing meant becoming nutrients. For 3 cycles, she navigated the Academy's social hierarchy with the careful precision of someone walking through a minefield, which, given her planet's tendency to make normal terrain actively hostile, was probably good practice. She learned which species found direct eye contact aggressive and adjusted her gaze accordingly. She memorized the 17 different acceptable greeting gestures and their contextual variations. She even mastered the art of the collective's preferred conflict resolution method, which involved extensive discussion of feelings and consensus building that would make most humans want to gnaw off their own limbs. She was, by every measurable metric, a model student. The problem with measurable metrics is they don't measure everything. In the upper tiers of Station Kepler 7's social hierarchy existed a peculiar phenomenon that the collective's founders had failed to engineer away: elitism. It turned out that removing physical dominance displays didn't eliminate social hierarchies. It just made them more elaborate. The students at the apex of this structure came from species that had been collective members for thousands of cycles. They'd perfected the art of social warfare, that peculiar form of aggression that left no marks but could destroy reputations with surgical precision. Among these, elites circled 3 particular students who'd formed what humans might call a clique, and what the collective's literature called an influential peer collaborative. They represented some of the most advanced species in known space, and they knew it. The first was Zelthonis, whose species had evolved from silicon-based hive organisms on a planet where carbon was an exotic element. Their crystalline structure refracted light in ways that most species found mesmerizing, which Zelthonis had learned to weaponize in social situations. They could quite literally make themselves the center of attention in any room, and they'd built a reputation as the Academy's premier tastemaker. What Zelthonis endorsed became popular. What they dismissed became social suicide. The second was Vrax Kor, a methane breather whose species had spent their evolutionary history in crushing darkness, developing cognitive abilities that made them strategic geniuses. Vrax Kor existed in a sealed suit of their own atmosphere, which somehow made them more intimidating. They rarely spoke, but when they did, their observations cut through social pretense like a laser through fog. They'd built their reputation on knowing everyone's secrets and being terrifyingly good at using them. The third was Pelmara, whose four-armed species had practically invented diplomacy as other species understood it. The Pelmaran Accords were literally named after their homeworld. Pelmara could navigate any social situation, diffuse any conflict, and make anyone feel either welcomed or ostracized with equal facility. They were charm personified, which made their cruelty all the more devastating when they deployed it. Together, they represented everything the collective believed it had achieved. Diverse species working in perfect, if coldly calculating, harmony. For 3 cycles, they'd observed the human with the analytical interest of scientists examining a fascinating specimen. She disrupted the careful social order simply by existing. Other students didn't know how to categorize her. She came from a species nobody had heard of 6 cycles ago, from a planet that sounded like a punishment. Yet she carried herself with a confidence that suggested she didn't understand her place in the hierarchy. This was unacceptable. The decision to correct this situation came during a planning session in Zelthanis's private quarters, which overlooked the station's central atrium and cost more in monthly fees than some species earned in a year. "She doesn't defer," Zelthanis observed, their crystalline structure pulsing with light patterns that indicated mild irritation. "Every other species understands the social framework. She just ignores it." "Not ignores," Vrax Kor corrected from their containment suit, their voice translated through speakers that made everything sound vaguely menacing. "She's unaware. Her species lacks the evolutionary context to understand hierarchy without physical dominance displays, which the dampeners prevent," Pelmara added, gesturing with 2 of their 4 hands in a pattern that expressed concerned contemplation. "She's operating without feedback mechanisms. Someone needs to provide that feedback." "Someone?" Zelthanis's light patterns shifted to amused amber. "Us," Pelmara clarified, as if this had always been obvious. "It's practically our duty. We maintain the social order. She's disrupting it. Therefore, we restore balance." The plan they devised was, by the standards of the collective's social warfare, relatively restrained. They would arrange a casual encounter after her applied xenobiology lecture, when foot traffic in that corridor section was statistically lowest. They would express their concerns about her social integration. They would offer guidance, framed as friendly advice from concerned peers. They would make it clear, through the careful application of social pressure and implied consequences, that she needed to adjust her behavior. It was civilized. It was non-violent. It was exactly the sort of thing the collective's founders had envisioned as proper conflict resolution. None of them had bothered to research what happens when you corner a predator. Applied xenobiology concluded precisely on schedule, as all classes at the academy did. The human gathered her materials with practiced efficiency while other students filed out, engaged in the post-lecture ritual of comparing notes and complaining about assignment difficulty. She moved with a fluid economy of motion that some species found unsettling, though they couldn't articulate why. It was just that she never seemed to waste movement, never second-guessed her actions, never displayed the slight awkwardness that characterized most species' baseline behavior. She exited into Corridor 7 Delta, which connected the sciences wing to the residential sectors. The corridor was wider than strictly necessary, a design choice meant to prevent the territorial anxiety some species experienced in confined spaces. The walls displayed rotating art from various collective cultures, currently showing something that involved geometric patterns in colors most humans couldn't perceive. Lighting was maintained at levels comfortable for the 17 species who used this corridor most frequently, which meant it was slightly too bright for human preference. She'd made it approximately 40 meters when they materialized from a side passage. Not literally materialized, of course. That would require technology beyond even the collective's capabilities. But they'd timed their entrance with the precision of people who understood theater. Zelthonis emerged first, their crystalline structure catching the light and scattering it in attention-grabbing patterns. Vrax's core followed, their containment suit servos whispering softly. Pelmara came last, all four arms positioned in a gesture that would read as friendly to most species, but blocked the corridor's width with casual completeness. The human stopped walking. Her posture didn't change dramatically, but something in her stillness suggested heightened awareness. Her head turned, tracking each of them in sequence, and several students further down the corridor suddenly discovered urgent reasons to be elsewhere. "Good cycle," Pelmara began, their voice warm and modulated for maximum approachability. "We hoped we might have a moment of your time." "I have time," the human replied. Her voice was level, accent still carrying traces of her native language's patterns. "What do you need?" "Need is such a transactional word," Zelthonis interjected, their light patterns shifting to conversational teal. "We wanted to talk, peer to peer, about your integration experience." "My integration is fine." Short responses now. Economical. Her eyes tracked between them in a pattern that wasn't quite fast enough to seem nervous, but wasn't quite slow enough to seem relaxed. "Is it, though?" Vrax's core's translated voice carried what might have been concern, or might have been something else. "We've noticed you seem isolated, struggling to understand the social dynamics here." "I understand them fine." "Do you?" Pelmara stepped slightly closer, still smiling, still ostensibly friendly. Two of their hands gestured in patterns meant to seem open and welcoming. The other two, positioned lower, created a subtle barrier. "Because from our perspective, you've been making several social missteps. Nothing major, of course, but the sort of thing that compounds over time." Other students had stopped in the corridor now, though maintaining careful distance. The collective discouraged direct intervention in social disputes. It was considered poor form to insert yourself into others' conflicts. The proper response was to observe, perhaps record if the situation seemed instructive, and trust that the individuals involved would reach consensus through dialogue. The human's eyes flicked to these observers, then back to the three in front of her. Her weight shifted almost imperceptibly. "What kind of missteps?" she asked. "Your eye contact patterns," Zelthonis said. "Your spatial positioning in group discussions. Your tendency to question established social hierarchies through subtle behavioral cues." "I'm not questioning anything." "Not consciously, perhaps." Vrax's core moved slightly to the side, not quite encircling, but suggesting the possibility. "But your species lacks the evolutionary sophistication to navigate complex social environments without guidance. We're offering that guidance." "Are you?" It wasn't a question. The two words fell flat, devoid of the upward inflection that would make them interrogative. The human's breathing had changed rhythm, though so subtly that only species with advanced auditory processing would notice. "We are," Pelmara confirmed, taking another small step forward. They were now close enough that their personal space and the humans would overlap by most species standards. Consider it a friendly intervention. We're concerned that your current trajectory will lead to social isolation and academic difficulties. We want to help you avoid that. By cornering me in a corridor. Cornering? Pelmara's expression shifted to confused concern, which was impressive given their species' non-standard facial structure. We're having a conversation, hardly cornering. 3 of you, 1 of me, blocking my path, after class when traffic is low. The human's voice remained level, but something had changed in her tone, something that didn't translate well through the collective's communication matrices. That's interesting. Your paranoia is exactly what we're talking about, Zelthonis said, their lights shifting to disappointed purple. You interpret friendly concern as threat. It's a Deathworld mentality that has no place in civilized society. Deathworld mentality, the human repeated. She'd stopped tracking them individually now. Her gaze had gone slightly distant, which some species found even more unsettling than direct eye contact. Right. We're not your enemies, Vraxkor assured her. We're trying to help you understand how things work here. There's a proper order to social interactions. Hierarchies exist for good reasons. Your species is new, which means you start at the bottom and work your way up through demonstrated competence and social acumen. You don't simply exist as if you belong at levels you haven't earned. I haven't claimed any level. Your behavior claims it for you, Pelmara said. The way you carry yourself, the way you engage with faculty as if you're equals, the way you don't show appropriate deference to established students. It sends messages whether you intend them or not. What kind of deference do you want? The question hung in the recycled air of the corridor. More students had gathered now, maintaining that careful distance that suggested interest without involvement. Someone was probably recording this. These sorts of social corrections sometimes became instructional materials in conflict resolution courses. Nothing excessive, Pelmara replied smoothly. Simply acknowledgement of the social reality. When you interact with us, show awareness that we've earned our positions through cycles of achievement. Don't speak to us as if we're peers until you've demonstrated you belong in that category. It's not personal. It's just structure. Structure, the human said. Then she smiled. Later, when investigators tried to reconstruct the sequence of events, this moment would be identified as the critical juncture. Multiple students in observation positions would describe the smile in their statements, though their descriptions varied wildly by species. The Vrenix witnesses reported that the electromagnetic spectrum around the human's face distorted. The Othani claimed her bioelectric signature spiked before disappearing entirely. The Quilix had to be sedated after attempting to describe what they'd perceived. The humans consulted during the investigation were less dramatic, but more disturbing. They called it a threat display smile, and explained that their species had developed the expression during their evolutionary history. It wasn't a happiness smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile predators gave prey when they'd decided the chase was over. To human eyes, it probably looked perfectly ordinary. Lips pulled back, teeth visible. Nothing supernatural or technologically disruptive about it. To species whose evolutionary history involved being something's lunch, it hit different. That's funny, the human said, still smiling. Structure, I like that word. The first camera died at 1447 station time. One moment, it was functioning perfectly, recording the scene in the corridor with its usual fidelity. The next moment, its feed dissolved into static before cutting out entirely. Maintenance logs would later show no hardware failure, no software glitch, no external interference. The camera simply decided it had seen enough. On Earth, the human continued, and her voice had dropped half an octave into a register that probably meant something comforting in her species' social contexts, but translated as something else entirely here. We have structure too. We evolved with it. Do you know what kind of structure? She didn't wait for an answer. Food chains. Two more. Cameras failed. Zelthonis's light patterns flickered erratically, cycling through colors that indicated confusion, then concern, then something that didn't have a name in their emotional spectrum. Vraxcor's containment suit emitted a soft whine as its atmospheric regulators worked harder than usual. Pelmara's four arms had frozen in positions that no longer suggested friendly conversation. The thing about food chains, the human said, and she'd started moving forward now, is that they're incredibly clear. No ambiguity, no politeness layers, no social performance. Just a very simple question that every organism has to answer every single day. Another step. Her posture had changed entirely. Nothing about her stance suggested violence by the collective's technical definitions. She hadn't raised her hands, hadn't made threatening gestures. But something in the way she held herself, in the way her weight distributed, in the way her breathing had settled into a deeper rhythm, spoke a language older than civilization. "Am I eating?" she continued. "Or am I being eaten?" Pelmara tried to step back and discovered their body had different ideas. Their species had evolved on a world where running from predators was discouraged by the simple fact that everything faster than you was interested in eating you. Better to freeze, hope it didn't notice, hope it decided you weren't worth the calories. Ancient instincts, buried under thousands of cycles of civilization, had just woken up with alarming opinions about the current situation. "This is inappropriate," Zelthonis managed. Though their light patterns had collapsed into a tight, defensive cluster that probably looked brilliant, but suggested they were approximately 3 seconds from having a breakdown. "We're attempting to have a civilized conversation." "Are you?" The human's smile hadn't changed. If anything, it had intensified, which witnesses would later describe as physically impossible and against several laws of nature. "Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like 3 people blocked the path of someone they considered weak, someone they thought would be easy to intimidate, someone from a species they decided didn't understand structure." She was close to Pelmara now, not touching. The collective's regulations about personal space were very clear, and she hadn't violated a single one. But close enough that Pelmara's 4 arms trembled with the effort of not recoiling. "Let me explain Earth structure to you," the human said softly. "On my planet, my species isn't even apex. We're not the biggest, not the strongest, not the fastest. We're just the ones who survived by being too stubborn to die and too mean to quit. You know what we called the things that tried to eat us?" The corridor had gone absolutely silent. Even the station's ambient hum seemed muted. "Dinner." The remaining cameras in the corridor section failed simultaneously. The dampeners, those carefully calibrated, systems designed to prevent aggression, registered nothing. Because nothing about the human's neurology suggested aggressive action. She wasn't planning violence, wasn't intending harm. She was simply existing with every safety mask stripped away. And the gap between civilized human and apex Deathworld predator was apparently much smaller than the collective had estimated. "We're sorry," Vraxcor said from their suit, which was a remarkable sentence given their species' famous inability to apologize. "We misjudged. You did, the human agreed. She turned her attention to Vrak's core, and whatever they saw in her eyes made their suit's servos lock up entirely. You thought the dampeners made you safe. You thought civilization made you safe. You thought I was the one who didn't understand structure. She let that hang for a moment. I understand structure perfectly. I understand it in my bones, which are denser than yours. I understand it in my muscles, which are redundant to the point of absurdity. I understand it in my nervous system, which processes threats faster than your species can perceive them. What you call civilization, we call Tuesday. Zelthoni had stopped emitting light entirely, which their species only did when facing existential threats. Here's what's going to happen, the human said, her voice returning to something approaching normal conversational tones. You're going to step aside. You're going to let me pass. And you're going to rethink your understanding of hierarchy and structure and who exactly belongs where. She took one more step forward, and Pelmara's body finally overrode their conscious control. They stumbled backward, all four arms flailing for balance. Zelthoni's and Vrak's core moved aside with considerably more haste than dignity. The human walked between them. Her pace was unhurried, her posture relaxed. The smile had faded into something neutral, almost pleasant. She looked like she was heading to her next class, completely unconcerned with the three students behind her who were experiencing comprehensive reevaluations of their place in the cosmos. She made it 10 meters before stopping. Without turning around, she spoke one last time. By the way, your hierarchies here? They're adorable, like watching children play pretend. On Earth, we have a saying about that kind of structure. She paused, and though she wasn't looking at them, somehow they could feel her smile return. We call it the games people play before they meet something with actual teeth. Then she continued walking, leaving three of the most socially dominant students at Station Kepler 7 frozen in a corridor with dead cameras and psychological damage that no amount of counseling would fully address. The aftermath rippled through the academy with the speed that gossip always achieves, regardless of species or technological advancement. By the next cycle, everyone knew something had happened in Corridor 7 Delta, though accounts varied wildly, depending on who you asked. The physical evidence was minimal. 3 students reported to medical with anxiety responses, 17 cameras simultaneously offline, and a corridor that several species now avoided during certain hours for reasons they couldn't articulate. Station security conducted an investigation that was thorough, professional, and ultimately futile. The head of security, a being whose species had spent their evolutionary history as ambush predators, and thus thought they understood intimidation, interviewed the human with growing unease. No physical contact occurred? They confirmed for the 3rd time. None, the human replied, sitting across from them in the interview room with posture that suggested complete cooperation. We just talked. Multiple students reported feeling threatened. Feeling isn't a violation of regulations. The cameras malfunctioned. Equipment failures happen. The security head consulted their datapad, searching for some regulation that had been broken, some clear policy violation they could cite. They found nothing. The collective's extensive legal framework had anticipated nearly every form of aggression species might attempt. Somehow, they'd missed the possibility that simply existing with insufficient pretense could be its own form of warfare. You smiled at them, the security head finally said. Smiling isn't illegal. What kind of smile was it? The human's expression shifted into something thoughtful, the honest kind. The interview concluded with no charges filed, no disciplinary action taken, and one security head who started sleeping significantly worse. The official report classified the incident as a social disagreement resolved without violence, which was technically accurate and meaningfully inadequate. The human cultural liaison, a harried-looking human named Rodriguez, who'd been working for the collective for 8 years, received summons to the dean's office within hours of the report's filing. The dean, whose species communicated through color patterns and had apparently given up on producing anything other than distressed beige, wanted explanations. "What happened in that corridor?" the dean demanded. Rodriguez, who'd reviewed the witness statements and had reached conclusions he didn't particularly enjoy, sighed. Posturing. Elaborate. My species spent approximately 200,000 years establishing dominance hierarchies without killing each other. Well, without always killing each other. We developed a sophisticated system of threat displays, status challenges, and social dominance behaviors. What you saw was a very mild version of that. Mild? The dean's beige deepened toward brown. 3 students required medical intervention because their species never developed functional threat displays, Rodriguez explained. Your dampeners removed the need for them. You've created a society where predator instincts are suppressed, which is admirable, but you've forgotten that prey species have instincts too. When those students tried to dominate someone from a predator species using social pressure instead of physical intimidation, they triggered responses they didn't evolve to handle. She threatened them. She existed at them, Rodriguez corrected. There's a difference. She didn't threaten violence. She simply made it very, very clear that she could, if she chose to, present problems they weren't equipped to solve. It's the equivalent of a human meeting a tiger in a cage, and the tiger reminding them that the cage is the only reason they're having a pleasant conversation. The dean cycled through several colors that didn't translate to any known emotion. This is unacceptable. It's inevitable, Rodriguez replied. You invited Deathworld species into your society because you believed civilization could override biology. You were partially right. We can override it. We do override it every single day. But it costs us, and occasionally, when someone pushes hard enough, the math changes. Are we in danger? It was, Rodriguez reflected later, the only question that really mattered to them. From her? No. She demonstrated remarkable restraint. She had the opportunity to cause real harm and chose not to. That's civilization working exactly as intended. Rodriguez paused. The question you should be asking is whether your other students are in danger from her or from the assumptions they're making about students from Earth. The question went unanswered because the dean had already decided on a course of action. A memo was circulated to faculty recommending increased cultural sensitivity training. The neural dampener specifications were sent to engineering for review. A committee was formed to study integration protocols for species from high-gravity, high-competition worlds. Nothing changed, and everything changed. In the corridors of Station Kepler 7, the social hierarchy underwent subtle recalculation. The human continued attending classes, completing assignments, maintaining her polite demeanor. But the quality of her isolation shifted. Before, students had avoided her out of vague discomfort. Now they avoided her out of something approaching respect, or at least a clearer understanding of risk assessment. Zelthonis requested a transfer to a different station, citing personal reasons. Vrax Core remained but never again initiated social conversations with anyone. Pelmara developed what their species called philosophical introspection, and what humans would recognize as anxiety, spending long hours questioning previously held assumptions about dominance and hierarchy. The human, for her part, seemed largely unaffected by the incident. She made no attempt to leverage her newfound reputation. She didn't become more aggressive or more withdrawn. She simply continued being herself, which was apparently sufficient. 3 cycles after the corridor incident, a first-year student from a prey species made the mistake of bumping into her during a crowded corridor transition. The student froze, all their instincts screaming that they'd just triggered a predator response and were about to become a learning experience for others. The human smiled, but it was the friendly kind of smile this time, the one that reached her eyes and involved no teeth. "No worries," she said, stepping aside to let the student pass. The student hurried away, confused by the dissonance between expectation and reality. Later, they would tell friends about the encounter, trying to reconcile the human who'd sent 3 elite students into psychological tailspins with the human who'd politely excused a clumsy collision. The answer, had they asked the right human, was simple: context. On Earth, you learned very quickly to match your response to the situation. Overreact to every bump and you exhausted yourself fighting unnecessary battles. Underreact to genuine threats and you removed yourself from the gene pool. Humans had survived by becoming very, very good at reading situations and calibrating their responses accordingly. 3 students had attempted to establish dominance through intimidation. They'd received a proportional response. 1 student had made an honest mistake. They'd received grace. This wasn't complicated mathematics. Though, to species who'd engineered away the need for such calculations, it probably seemed like dark magic. The semester continued. Exams were administered. Projects were completed. The collective's educational machinery churned forward, incorporating its new members with the slow, grinding efficiency of bureaucracy. The cameras in Corridor 7 Delta were replaced. Though the new ones sometimes displayed odd glitches, the technicians attributed to cosmic radiation or old wiring or poltergeists if they'd been working too long. In the Academy's central database, several notes were added to various files. In the humans file, displays culturally appropriate responses to social challenges. No disciplinary action required. In Zelthonis, Vrak's core, and Pelmara's files, recommended for additional cultural sensitivity training following misunderstanding with human student. Misunderstanding. The collective loved that word. It absolved everyone of malice while acknowledging something had gone wrong. It was diplomatic, neutral, and completely inadequate to describe what had actually occurred. But the collective had spent 17,000 cycles perfecting the art of peaceful coexistence. And sometimes peace required gentle euphemisms. On a rest cycle near the end of the semester, the human sat in the observation deck looking out at the stars. Another student, emboldened by time or curiosity or simple social obligation, approached and sat at a respectful distance. "Can I ask you something?" the student ventured. "Sure." "What happened in that corridor?" "Really?" The human considered the question, watching light from a distant star bend around the station's gravitational field. They thought the rules changed because we weren't on Earth anymore. They forgot that biology doesn't update as fast as legislation. "Are you angry about it?" "About what?" "They made a mistake. They learned from it. That's how growth works. They were trying to hurt you." "Socially, yeah." The human shrugged. "On Earth, we have a saying. Do no harm, but take no shit." They pushed. I pushed back. We all learned something about boundaries. That's a good outcome. The student processed this. "You don't seem like the person everyone describes." "I'm not," the human agreed. "I'm just someone from a competitive environment trying to navigate a cooperative one. Most days I manage it fine. That day, someone tested the boundaries, and I reminded them where they were. By smiling at them. By being honest with them, the human corrected. The smile was just communication. On Earth, we have lots of different smiles. Happy smiles, nervous smiles, threatening smiles. It's efficient once you learn the language. Your planet sounds terrifying. It is, the human agreed cheerfully. It's also beautiful and frustrating and the only home I've got. You learn to appreciate the contradictions. The student sat with that for a moment. For what it's worth, I don't think you're scary. The human turned to look at them, and her smile was genuine, warm, completely devoid of anything except friendliness. Thanks. That means more than you probably realize. They sat together for a while longer, watching stars that didn't care about hierarchies or species or the complicated social dances of evolved beings trying to coexist. The universe was vast and indifferent, which made the small moments of connection precious. Eventually, they went their separate ways, back to the Academy's routines. The collective continued its mission of binding disparate species into functional civilization. Station Kepler 7 maintained its operations, processing students through its programs, preparing them for whatever roles they'd fill in the broader society. And in Corridor 7 Delta, where cameras still sometimes glitched for no reason technical services could identify, students continued passing by, most of them unaware of what had happened there. Those who knew the story told it to newcomers, each telling adding embellishments and losing details until it became Academy mythology. The human at the center of the story completed her studies with distinction, neither acknowledging nor denying the reputation that followed her. She'd come to learn, and she'd learned. She'd come to prove humans could integrate into the collective, and she'd proven it, albeit not quite the way the collective had expected. Years later, a xenosociology student would write their dissertation on the incident, analyzing it as a case study in cross-species miscommunication and the challenges of integrating predator species into predominantly prey species societies. The paper would win awards. It would become required reading in diplomatic training programs. It would spawn countless follow-up studies and symposiums. None of it would quite capture what had actually happened in that corridor, because some things resist academic analysis. Sometimes, the universe reminds evolved civilizations that they're only temporarily removed from their evolutionary roots. Sometimes, someone forgets that politeness is a choice predators make. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can encounter isn't someone looking for a fight. It's someone who knows exactly how to end one. The unified collective would continue its mission of peaceful coexistence. Station Kepler 7 would continue producing educated, culturally sensitive graduates. Humans would continue integrating into galactic society, learning its rules and teaching their own in exchange. But in quiet moments, in administrative meetings when discussing integration protocols, someone would inevitably reference the corridor incident. It became shorthand for a lesson the collective hadn't expected to learn. Civilization was a beautiful achievement, but it worked best when everyone remembered it was a collaboration, not a guarantee. And somewhere in the galaxy, on a death world called Earth, where evolution had spent millions of years teaching very specific lessons about hierarchy and dominance, and what happens when you corner something with teeth, humans continued being human, complicated, adaptable, and dangerous only when you forgot they were choosing not to be. The story ended the way most real stories do, without dramatic conclusions or neat resolutions. Life continued. Lessons were learned. Myths were made. And in Station Kepler 7's maintenance logs, Corridor 7 Delta's cameras remained listed as requiring frequent service, a bureaucratic notation that would persist long after everyone involved had graduated and moved on. Some stories don't end. They just become part of the architecture.